Hello and welcome. There are a few things more annoying than a door handle that just will not cooperate. You lift it up to lock it for the night, and nothing. It's just stuck. So if you're here, I'm guessing you're probably staring at a door right this very moment that refuses to lock, or maybe it won't even push down to let you out. Okay, let's get right into this. And look, it's more than just a little frustrating, right? It's a real security risk, and you need to get it sorted out fast. But before you go calling a locksmith, there might be a much simpler solution. We're going to walk through 5 really effective checks you can do yourself. And hey, this could save you a good bit of time and money. So let's get started. All right, first up, the #1 most common cause of handle problems, especially with those UPVC and composite doors: simple misalignment. Over time, doors just kind of sag or shift, and that throws the whole locking mechanism out of whack. So, how do you know if this is your problem? Well, the signs are actually pretty clear. The big one is this. Does the handle work perfectly when the door is open, but then jams the second you try to close it? That's a huge clue. Also, just take a step back and look at the gap around the door. If it looks wider at the top than the bottom, or if you can literally hear the door rubbing on the frame, you've probably found your culprit. Now, the fix can be surprisingly straightforward. First, just double check that the handle works fine with the door open. Then, take a close look at the hinges. Most of them have these little adjustment screws. With a screwdriver or an Allen key, you can make tiny, tiny tweaks to raise or shift the door until it sits perfectly in the frame again. And here's a really important tip. Be gentle. I'm serious. Make tiny adjustments, like a quarter turn at a time, and then test the door. Trying to force it can wreck the hinges or the frame, and that'll make the problem a whole lot worse. Okay, let's move on to checkpoint #2. So what if your door seems perfectly aligned, but the handle is still stiff? Well, the mechanism inside might just be all gummed up with dirt and dust. It's time for a little lubrication. But wait, before you reach for that can of WD-40, you need to know that oil-based sprays are actually a terrible idea for locks. Why? Because oil is sticky, it attracts dust, and it can make the problem even worse down the line. What you really want is a dry lubricant like graphite powder or a silicone-based spray. The process itself is super simple. If you can, pop the handle cover off to get better access. Then, just apply your lubricant right into the keyhole, onto that little latch bolt, and around the metal spindle that connects the handles. After that, just work the handle up and down maybe a dozen times to really spread that lubricant all through the mechanism. Now, as you're doing this, you might see some black, gritty stuff start to ooze out. Don't panic. That is actually a great sign. It means you're flushing out all that old, dried-up gunk that was causing the jam in the first place. All right, so if alignment and lubrication didn't do the trick, we have to consider something a bit more serious: a failure inside the lock's mechanism. Specifically, we're talking about the gearbox. So what the heck is a gearbox? Well, in most modern doors with multiple locking points, the gearbox is like the central command hub. When you lift that handle, the gearbox is the thing that tells all the different hooks and bolts to shoot out and lock the door. If it fails, the whole system goes down. The signs of a failed gearbox are pretty unmistakable. The handle might feel totally loose and floppy with no resistance at all. Or you might hear these awful grinding or crunching sounds when you try to move it. If the handle is completely seized solid, even with the door wide open, or your key just won't turn, it's almost certainly the gearbox. And listen, this is where it's really important to know your limits. Replacing a gearbox is not a simple DIY job. But the good news is, you usually don't have to replace that entire super expensive locking strip. A locksmith can often just swap out the central gearbox, and that will save you a lot of money. Let's dial it back to something a bit simpler. Sometimes the problem isn't buried deep inside the door. It's right there on the surface. We're talking loose screws or just a worn-out handle. So here's your quick checklist. Grab a screwdriver and just gently snug up all the screws on the handle's backplate. But be careful not to crank them down too hard. While you're at it, give the handle a good wiggle. Does it feel super wobbly? Do you see any visible cracks? It might just be old and worn out, and time for a new one. And here's a tip that applies to pretty much any home repair. Invest in quality parts. I know it's tempting to grab the cheapest replacement handle you can find online, but they often fail really quickly, and you'll be right back where you started. And here we are, at our final checkpoint. This one's about the door frame, not the door itself. We are talking about the strike plate. that little metal plate where the latch goes in. To check this, close the door really, really slowly and just watch the latch. Does it line up perfectly with the hole in the strike plate? If it's a little off, you can usually just loosen the screws on the plate, shift it a tiny bit, and then retighten them. Also, peek inside the hole. Sometimes a glob of paint or some built-up crud is all it takes to block the latch. Okay, we've gone through 5 different checks. If you've tried every single one of these and your handle is still stuck, this is the moment to put your tools down. Because honestly, the absolute worst thing you can do now is try to force it. That's how you break something much deeper inside the mechanism, turning what could be a simple repair into a really complex and expensive job. By working through these steps, you've basically diagnosed the issue just like a pro would. You've got a diagnostic toolkit now. So go take another look at that door. Which problem do you think it is?